Greetings everyone, hey, how you doing? It's Matt Sella, and today we are doing another review for The Mandalorian Season 1, Episode 2, doubly called The Child, or Chapter 2, whichever one you prefer. I am joined here, sort of, with a good friend of mine. It's Marc, in a galaxy far, far away, I'm assuming. How you doing out there, Marc? How many suns are on Tatooine? I forget.
On Tatooine, there's two. I think there's only one on wherever the Mandalorian's hanging out.
That's fair to say. So, we'll be doing the usual spoiler talk discussion over Chapter 2 of The Mandalorian. If you have not seen the episode yet, I highly recommend you check it out. I'm pretty sure you have. It's a very popular series, wouldn't you say, Marc?
A very popular series, and quite honestly, a much better episode than Episode 1 anyway, so...
Oh, spoilers in our opinion. But yeah, I think we're going to have some pretty good discussion talking about the enjoyment of this episode. So without further ado, Marc, would you care to give us the summary of this eloquent Mandalorian episode?
While returning to his ship on foot, the child in tow, the Mandalorian is ambushed by a trio of Trandoshan warriors, only to find that his ship has been ransacked by the elusive brigand bandits, the Jawas. After a brief pursuit that ends in failure, he returns to his farmer friend, Kiwili. Kiwil begins to discuss a trade for the parts stolen by the Jawas. The Jawas want only one thing, an egg, but not just any egg. The egg of the mighty Sumatran woolly rhino from that one episode of the Wild Thornberries. Fighting it, he seems outmatched until the Baby Yoda displays a gift of the Force. Retrieving the egg, the Jawas feast, and the Mandalorian repairs his ship, heading off into the unknown, parting ways with his good farmer friend, Kiwilil, knowing that he has made a good friend and ally, though he will not join him on his quest for bounty and fame.
Wow, that sounds amazing! I'm so glad you told it like that.
Yeah, I think that sums it up pretty good.
I think so too. So, Marc, I'd like to hand you the floor first, because I think I went first last time. What are some of your general thoughts on the episode, The Child?
Well, for starters, and I believe we had discussed this in the first episode, I would say the score really stepped up in this episode and was much better and not so synth-reliant. Not that that's a bad thing per se, but it just seemed to fit more with what was happening on screen, and that was a big plus for me.
I wholeheartedly agree, because I remember in the last episode, I thought it sounded a little too much like the 80s synth style, and I don't remember whose review I was watching. I think it may have been Double Toasted. They mentioned that the composer for at least the first episode, assuming it's the same for this one, was the same composer who did Creed.
Oh.
So I guess that makes sense why it has that kind of Philadelphia boxer feel to it. But in this one, I agree with what you said. It definitely felt more like an adventure cinematic scope and more in tune with the John Williams Star Wars vibe.
And while being its own thing, because, I love John Williams and he, of course, one of the greatest film composers of all time. But, I do want to hear some new and distinct flavors for things that aren't, even the actual main movies. I want to feel a new identity each time in a way, Yeah,
that's for sure. And we can kind of go into a sub-discussion about that too. But I feel like a good person who kind of deviated but made his own version of Star Wars music was from, I would say, Rogue One. I believe it was Michael Giacchino who did the music for that.
Oh, yeah. And of course, he's a great talent as well. And he actually, from my understanding, had very little time to actually do that score. So had he been given the whole, traditional length amount of time, I could only imagine what it could have been.
But yeah, no, I mean, I agree with you. I definitely feel like the music was a great improvement here. One of my biggest points, my positives here, because Marc and I were talking about this before the recording, and I honestly don't really have much cons, but my biggest takeaway for this is I finally felt like I was on an adventure in the world of Star Wars. I really liked how this episode relied very little on dialogue, especially with the Mandalorian carrying around that Baby Yoda creature. And it just felt like a lot of fun. Like, I had fun seeing his journey of like trying to return to his ship, find out that's been scrapped and that he's got to get the parts back so he can escape the planet with his bounty. And we got the return of the Nick Nolte character. I thought that was great.
And I love that character.
I do too. And I just love how they handled him, not really giving out a lot about him. Why don't you tell us more about that, actually?
Well, at the end, the Mandalorian invites him to join his crew because he could use some hands. And maybe it's because I read One Piece, but I was like, oh yeah, this is what we're doing now. All right, cool new crew member. Here we go. And he says, he declines, and it's very polite and formal about they exchange their thanks. But he has this line of how he will no longer. It implies that he, at the very least, was a slave or a servant before in his life, and how he's just content on his farm, and that, very a throwaway line, if anything else, not even as long as I've described it, but it says so much about the character without saying anything of actual detail, and I think that's very masterfully done.
I think so too. Like, because we were talking about before, like sometimes if you want to tell a lot, you don't need to actually say a lot. There's subtlety there to get your point across.
And speaking of a few other positives, I didn't even notice it in the first episode, but we got a real practical baby species of Yoda here, and it was a very good animatronic. And Matt, I believe you even said it reminded you a bit of Dark Crystal.
It did. It reminded me a lot of Deed, just like with the big eyes and the green and the ears, and I just thought it was really cute.
Oh yeah, and very well puppeted, I must say.
Yeah, I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but there was this one part very early in the episode where they actually had the ears dipped down, and you could see it kind of fold along with the blanket/clothes that it had. I was like, wow, that is really good, like secondary or follow through visual for that puppet. I really like that.
Absolutely. And it really is cheap, and it really kind of, ruins my, stance as a critic. But my lizard brain did go, oh, they did the thing when I heard the off-world Jawas say Houdini. I was like, oh, they did the thing.
Houdini. I know, I love that little tidbit. But yeah, no, and speaking of Jawas, I also really like the fact that we didn't get like a carbon copy of like the Tatooine Jawas. You said it before, it's like supposed to be like the Outworld Jawas, where they actually had like different cloaks and a different attire and one of those land cruiser things. I just really like the fact that they actually gave variation to it and not just said, oh, here's another Easter egg or a throwback to something you know.
Oh yeah, it made it its own without, it was still the Jawas, but it was its own thing, and I appreciate that because, I mean, it is a big galaxy. You can see the same thing without it being entirely the same every time.
Yeah, exactly. Jumping to the cons, like, I'll be honest with you folks, I really don't have one, except maybe like the CGI is still kind of shoddy, especially like with that rhino alien creature that the Mandalorian was trying to get the egg from.
The Sumatran woolly rhino.
Yeah, but at that point, I was kind of forgiving it, where I was like, you know what? I saw so much cool practical effects, and some of the ships and the sets actually looked convincing, which I assume some of those moments were CGI. So at that point, I was like, you know what? I'm okay with this.
Yeah, and I think I was in that same boat too, because I mean, like you said, just everything else in this episode was so great, And even then, I think it was a slight improvement over the first episode with the CGI, especially with the creatures. And like, at the very least, it's being consistent with its quality, which I can appreciate more than it being all over the place.
And I think part of the fact that the CGI has in its advantage is that we're in one location, whereas the first episode was kind of establishing where the Mandalorian is kind of hunkered down, where his travels may take him, and what will be his next initiation. So I think that's why there's like so much CGI to kind of show this world, and because of that, you see the hand, and the hand's not looking as crisp as it could be because it's trying to do so much. Whereas this episode, we're in one location, we're dealing with a set number of obstacles, and so the visual artist team has time to kind of focus on fleshing that out. So I think that's where the advantage of the passable CGI comes from, in my opinion.
Oh, but just a few shout outs, of course. This episode was written by Jon Favreau and directed by Rick Famuyiwa. I apologize if I mispronounced your name, Rick, but also, a very job well done. I think it would be incorrect of us to say this was not also a much better directed episode.
I think so. But at the same time, though, while Dave Filoni did direct the first episode, I kind of go back to what I said previously, where it's supposed to set up the show.
Oh, yeah.
There was more on his hands that he had to deal with. Whereas this one, it's a simple story of getting off the planet. But even still, I think this was a really well-directed episode.
And that's not to take anything away from Dave Filoni, because let's be honest, if we ever looked back at really a lot of our favorite shows, even the first episode, if it's really good, is usually kind of rocky compared to some of the other ones.
Exactly. But overall, I think I was severely entertained by this episode. So it's another good pass in my book. And we were talking about before, it's like, I don't watch Game of Thrones, but this is what it must have felt like for Game of Thrones fans waiting for the next episode. So I'm actually looking forward to next Friday.
Oh yeah, Friday is now me marking my calendars.
And we should get a whole bunch of good episodes from here on out.
Mm-hmm.
And that'll do it for our episode spoiler talk review for The Mandalorian Season 1, Episode 2, Chapter 2, called The Child. You heard our opinion, but now we want to hear your opinion. Let us know in the comment section below. Did you enjoy this episode? Did you not enjoy this episode? Share your thoughts. Join the conversation. If you like reviews just like this, subscribe to my podcast channel. Ring that bell to be notified when new videos drop, like this video. And if you want to support me directly, please go to my Patreon at patreon.com/Matt Sella. Consider donating as little as $1 a month will help go towards my podcast channel, art, animation, and content made just for you. This is Matt Sella.
This is Marc.
Thanking you all for tuning in.
What's up,